Isn't that like a quote from the Hindu Bible?
Well, it's not. Yeah, yeah. It's a quote of Vishnu, this Hindu god who becomes all powerful and destructive. And yeah, one of the Oppenheimer, I think, working on the Manhattan Project, quotes that when he sees the power they've created.
Ah, makes sense.
Okay, so when you talk about Pearl Harbor, Day of Infamy, who said that? Who called it a Day of Infamy?
The president.
Harry Truman, right?
No, Franklin
not
D.
Harry
Roosevelt.
Truman.
Dang it.
Roosevelt, FDR. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, same president, goes from the during the Great Depression. He goes from a Great Depression to a World War. So whatever you think of him, he definitely was president during two big events in American history. Got us through them. So the first thing you want to talk about here, we're gonna have an A, B, and a C, is the pre-war situation, and then we're gonna talk about why the attack, why did the Japanese attack, and then finally the attack on Pearl Harbor.
All right.
Anybody been to Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
Austin?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you go out on the Arizona Memorial?
Yeah. And then we like take a boat out there.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool.
There's some oil leaking from that ship, you know that?
Yep. Basically a tomb. Okay, so how would you describe the pre-war situation? What was the U.S.'s stance towards world events? Because Hitler invades, and we'll talk about this next week. Hitler invades in Europe in 1939. So
No way.
World War II starts much earlier than 1941. What's the U.S.'s stance?
He literally makes a team with Russia. U.S. was basically, we won't join the war, but we'll start supplying the Allies.
Right. So you've got isolationism.
Again.
They still don't want to get involved. They don't want to get involved. World War I was bad enough. They don't want to get involved. We're in the middle of a Great Depression. We're trying to get through that. And so we do not want to get involved. So they're trying to stay out of it. What's the relationship like with the Japanese?
It was because since World War I, they were having like a bad mood because America was like, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. And Japan was like, I don't have any resources, so I'm going to go invade some China and go get some. Well,
they definitely felt the need that they weren't, they wanted to be a Western power like Europe and like the United States. So they see that the big boys on Earth expanding and building empires, and Japan was like, hey, we're Westernized, we've industrialized, we've got these awesome battleships and stuff, we want to expand too. And so where does Japan start to expand?
No. China.
Because they're just an island. So where do they start to build an empire?
Korea and like half of China.
Right. Yeah, a region called Manchuria. And this is in 1937.
Don't forget about the train bombing.
Okay, and so 1937. So they expand and they begin to basically carve out an empire, first in Korea. Absolutely horrendous what they did to both the Korean and the Chinese people. And so that begins to strain the U.S. relations with Japan. And how does the U.S. respond to their aggression?
They were like, whatever. They're just going to be over there, literally.
The oil embargo?
Yeah,
Very good, yes. So they begin to cut off, just like today, we have the same situation with North Korea and Iran. They basically do a commercial boycott. We're not going to trade with you. And the biggest thing is the oil embargo. That how much of Japan's oil was coming from the U.S.?
80%.
Yeah, 80%. So,
Yeah, 80%.
And this is the time of the internal combustion engine. So airplanes, ships, Jeeps, everything runs on oil, runs on petroleum. So you cannot be a world power if you do not have oil resources. So when the U.S. cuts that off and says you're not going to get it from us unless you stop what you're doing in China, that is a real threat to Japanese power.
Is that why Japan tried to destroy their oil plants?
You mean during the bombing?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why it would have been a good idea, because you can't run a military without gasoline, without oil.
Also, you can't fix ships without like machines to fix them.
Right. So
that's also how you power boats.
So there was a direct threat to the Japanese, expansion. The fact that the U.S. would no longer trade oil with them. And so that's going to get us to then why would they bother to attack the U.S. when the U.S. was not looking for a fight? key there is they can't get the oil from the U.S., and so they've got to find another place to get the oil. And
Good
another
point.
place you can get a lot of oil is they're seeking resources in Indonesia. Okay, sometimes it's called Indochina, and that is the region of southern China and Indonesia, those islands off the southern coast of China and, you know, the Southwest Pacific. And so they said, we need to go into these other regions so that we can get our own oil supplies, so we're not dependent upon the U.S., but they figure the U.S. is going to stop them if they try to do that. So what's their strategy?
They are like, let's get America out of the war because they remember World War One, and they're like, oh, America's gonna be like wrecking the Axis powers, so let's just get them out of the war before they even start.
Yeah, I wouldn't even link it to World War One. It's just the fact that the U.S. has a base in the Pacific. Anybody know where the U.S. has a base in the Pacific?
Midway?
Midway, that's halfway, but we're even closer than that. We have a territory over there that we got from the
Philippines.
Spanish-American War.
The Philippines.
Yeah, the Philippines. And so they know if they start, you know, invading all over Indonesia, the U.S. has a base right then and there. So their strategy is, you know what, let's punch America in the nose. Let's take them out militarily from the beginning, and then we'll have time to get the resources in Indochina. And so they're trying to stop the U.S. And so they actually attack two places. The idea is to attack Pearl Harbor and the Philippines simultaneously. It's not the only attack that happens on December 7th. And the idea is that it's wound and limit the U.S. right from the beginning. If we hit them hard enough, they're not going to want to fight a war way over here in Asia. And so they'll just stay out of it, and we'll be free to do whatever we want. Anybody remember who the leaders who devised the attack are?
The emperor and some like military guy.
Oh, Mussolini.
Mussolini's Italy. He'll be next
And
week.
Mussolini's
Hitler.
Hitler's
No.
Germany. He'll be next week.
It was like the emperor or something.
Oh,
yeah.
Emperor
Emperor.
Oh,
with
I'm
an
searching this
H.
up.
So
Let's
you've got Emperor
Hirohito.
Hirohito.
Orito.
Let's see if it's spell it right. Emperor Hirohito.
see.
Oops, let's spell that correctly. Now he's just kind of a figurehead, so he's not the mastermind of this. The guy actually running the Japanese government is a guy named Hideki Tojo. He's like the Minister of War. So when we talk about Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, you want to mention Tojo, Hideki Tojo. He's the military leader in Japan. And he taps a guy named Admiral Yamamoto. He's the one who masterminds the actual attack on Pearl Harbor.
So apparently it looks like it was on a Sunday, so people weren't really looking for ships planes.
Well, so they devised basically, it was a huge sneak attack. They knew they had to have the element of surprise. There's a lot of details involved in that. It turns out, they attacked on a Sunday thinking that would be a day in which we'd be very unprepared, and they were correct. The only reason, interesting note, that did backfire because we didn't have as many people on base on Sunday, and casualties would have been far worse if they hadn't attacked on a Sunday.
Let's
So it
thank
actually kind
God.
of was a blessing in disguise, even though it meant we weren't particularly ready.
Let's just thank God that our aircraft carriers were out at sea at that time.
Okay. And again, remember, so the idea is predicated on the idea that America isn't going to want to fight, and that if we hit them hard enough from the beginning, they won't even get into this war, and we'll be able to go build our empire and seek oil supplies elsewhere. So then again, we get to the actual attack. December 7th, 1941. Make sure you get the date there. That's what it's centered on. And ironically, what the U.S. could have been more prepared. What were some of the warning signs they missed? Anybody catch any of those?
Didn't they get a radio? Like a radio
Or they
call?
caught a submarine.
So
Yeah.
one, they actually catch a submarine trying to sneak into the harbor, and they destroy it, and they phone it in, and the guy says, it basically gets lost in the telephone lines. The guy's like, don't worry about it. I want you to confirm for sure that, what's going on before I tell anybody else. So that definitely was a big mistake. In terms, not the radio, but radar. They actually had just set up the first radar station on the island a few days before the attack, and it worked. They detected the entire, armada of aircraft coming in, but it was so new they weren't really sure if they trusted it. And then when they actually did tell somebody, the guy goes, "Oh, that's actually a flight of our own planes coming in from the mainland."
And then they
which
saw
was
those
totally incorrect. It was coming in from the wrong direction. But again, they were just kind of careless, and they disregarded the warning of radar.
And then they saw those red suns on the plane's wings.
Yeah, at the very didn't even see those until the bombs started going off.
Yeah.
They also actually, and one other thing you could note here, and again, right, more than just what I'm putting in the outline, that we'd actually broken the Japanese code. And so in Washington, D.C., they were decoding, they actually came across the message of Japan declaring war prior to the attack. But when they tried to get the message to Pearl Harbor, the telephone lines were not functioning. And so they actually sent it Western Union telegram, which is, we call that snail mail. There was just no way it was going to get there in time. And so there's famously, a couple hours after the attack ends, the commander of Pearl Harbor gets this letter that says, "Be advised, you're going to be attacked today." It's like, oh, thanks a lot. Doesn't do me much good. So they actually do achieve complete surprise. US is caught completely flat-footed. They destroy 18 ships overall. Most notably, they sink 5 U.S. battleships. The most famous being the USS Arizona. That's the one that Austin's been to. It accounted. A bomb went off inside its ammo stores, and it exploded. It's the biggest explosion of the day. Half of the casualties, 2,000 Americans are going to be, over 2,000 are going to be killed, and half of those were on the USS Arizona. It never gets rebuilt. All but 2, the Arizona and the Utah, never get rebuilt. They're both memorials there to this day. The other one, every ship else that is sunk gets rebuilt and re-enters the war later on.
How many ships sunk?
18 ships, 5 battleships, over 2,000 dead. Up until 9/11, it was the worst attack on American soil.
My question is, why would Japan warn America if they were going to attack Pearl Harbor?
Excellent question. The reason was the ethics of war. They knew that the proper way, and that, again, funny how we try to apply rules to war, but the rules of war was you declare war before you attack. A sneak attack, especially in the Japanese honor code, was considered dishonorable. And so they intended for the U.S. to get the notification of the attack about an hour before the attack actually began. That way they could say, we told you what we were doing, and then we did it. The problem is, the Japanese people in Washington, D.C. translating that telegram were so slow. Their typical translator was sick, and they had a guy in there who was too slow. So the warning doesn't get there in time. And it ends up being a huge issue, especially for the Japanese, because they realize that the U.S. is going to be ticked off because they attacked without any sort of declaration of war beforehand. And Yamamoto, after the attack, is said to have gone back into his room distressed and not quite weeping, but extremely upset. And he says, you know what, we just really ticked off the Americans, because I can't imagine anything that would make them madder than an attack without any sort of declaration of war. So again, that was something the Japanese had planned to do that again kind of backfired. And you get that's where you get that famous quote by Yamamoto, that after the attack, he says, I fear all that we've achieved is to awaken a sleeping giant and to have filled him with terrible resolve. Because he realized we didn't punch them hard enough to keep them out of the war. We just punched them hard enough to tick them off, and now they're going to come after us.
I like when you take a big man's burrito.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to move on to Midway. Any questions on the first paragraph? Clarifications or details repeated? All right, Sam says thumbs up. We're going to talk about Coral Sea, Operation Magic, and then Midway. There's all sorts of battles. You could get into them. World War II could be studied your whole life, and it's incredibly fascinating. I love reading about it. But somebody already mentioned it. Well, there were 2 big mistakes, or not even mistakes, but just things that the reason that even though the Japanese achieved total surprise and completely walloped the fleet, what were the 2 things they missed?
Ooh, I know that one. The submarine fields, the repair yards, and the oil yards.
Okay, well, yeah, they missed the oil yards. And you can go ahead and put oil. Whoops, I can't spell oil. Oil and the repair yards. So it's going to shock the Japanese how quickly we can rebuild our ships and get them back out continually throughout the war, not just after Pearl Harbor. And if they had destroyed our fuel supplies there on Pearl Harbor, that would have forced the entire fleet to retreat to San Diego. And so our western front would have been San Diego, not Pearl Harbor. But because they missed that, we're able to keep rebuilding and refueling our ships from Pearl Harbor. And so even though it gets smashed, it's still a very operational base. And so that's huge. It would have been a total game changer. They probably could have invaded Hawaii if they had destroyed the oil and repair yards. Along with one other thing, what else was not in the harbor?
All the
ships
aircraft
with,
carriers.
the planes on them. Yeah.
Aircraft carriers. As we're going to, big lesson from this war is that battleships are not obsolete, but they're not the main ship. It's aircraft. One plane with a torpedo can destroy a massive ship full of thousands of men. So if you want to be able to launch planes, and the fact that we had 3 aircraft carriers missing, if those had been destroyed, that also would have been a game changer.
I hear a bird.
Reason you bring that up is it's at Coral Sea. The Battle of the Coral Sea is the Japanese are trying to expand in order to invade Australia. They're trying to encircle Australia and invade Australia. And if they're able to do that, then the U.S. has no base over in Asia. Australia and New Zealand are going to actually end up being a huge allied base. But the Battle of the Coral Sea is where the U.S. stopped that. It's the first carrier-to-carrier battle ever. So in other words, the U.S. fights the Japanese, and they never even see each other. They're 2 carriers hundreds of miles away, and they just launch their planes. They just launch planes at each other. And the U.S. is actually able. They lose one of their aircraft carriers, but they're actually able to at least stop. It's a stalemate. It's a stalemate, but the U.S. is at least able to stop the advance of the Japanese into the South Pacific, threatening New Zealand and Australia. And so that's key, because up until that point, the Japanese have expanded all over the South Pacific. For basically about 5 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese are able to do whatever they want because the U.S. is trying to rebuild. And the Coral Sea happens in about, I think, May 1942, and that's the first time they're able to at least stop them, even though you can't say they won the battle. Operation Magic. Has anybody ever heard of that? Operation Magic. This is what allows us to win at Midway, and probably
Oh yeah, I know that one. I know that one.
What is it?
So basically, the Americans intercepted a telegram saying like some weird like language, and they suspected that one word meant Midway. So they sent a unrestricted telegram saying that the water purifier on Midway was down, and the Japanese intercepted that, and they intercepted the telegram that they sent back saying the same word about the water tanks, and they were able to crack the enigma of the Japanese, and they were able to prepare for the war. The attack.
Yeah, very good. I mean, that's a long version, so which is a pretty cool story. Short version is they're able to crack that. Sometimes you can make an argument that mathematicians helped win World War II, because in both when we get to Germany, but also in Japan, one of the key things is we're able to read the Japanese mail. We're able to decode a lot of their transmissions, not completely, and that's why what's the story Sam just told is kind of cool, because we know the Japanese are planning this huge attack. We just don't know where. And then, as he described, we're able to figure out they're coming to Midway. We're able to detect that they're coming, and so we're able to set a trap. The Japanese plan is to attack Midway and then use that as a base in the middle of the Pacific to then attack Pearl Harbor and potentially invade Hawaii. They're looking to kind of create an outer boundary of their empire, first at Midway and then maybe even Hawaii. And so this is kind of a serious attempt at them at expansion. But luckily, because of Operation Magic, we're able to set a trap, and we send 3 U.S. carriers to stop them. And the key there is the Japanese don't know that we know, and so that's why it's a trap.
How do you spell
You've
enigma?
seen the movie. That's what you saw depicted. Why is the battle at Midway so decisive? Why does it change the entire course of the war? Anybody know?
It puts us in range to launch the atomic bombs.
Not yet. Nope, we're not even
No,
close.
okay.
It actually basically, it prevents them from invading Hawaii and threatening the west coast of the U.S.
It helps them gain a base for their island hopping campaign.
Well, kind of. That's going to come in a minute. It has to do with what the U.S. is able to destroy at the battle.
Oh yeah,
They-
they destroyed almost all their aircraft carriers.
Yep, they sink four Japanese aircraft carriers. Okay, that's the key. In just a matter of minutes, the heart, and again, aircraft carriers are the heart of the power of a navy at this period of time. And so, in a couple minutes, they're able to. And the story's lots of details. You don't have to go into it, but they're able to sink 4 Japanese carriers in a matter of minutes. And that basically means the Japanese cannot go on offense anymore. Without those carriers, they're not going to invade Midway. They're not going to invade Hawaii. They're not going to expand anymore. And so from that point on, the Japanese are on defense. All they can do is try to hold the islands that they have. And so it doesn't mean the U.S. has won the war. It doesn't even mean the U.S. is winning the war. It just means now all of a sudden the U.S. can go on the offense and Japan's going to go on the defense. And really, the kind of what they're getting into our last point here, their strategy becomes, well, you know what, we're not going to push the U.S., the Americans back anymore, but you know what we'll do is we'll make it so horrible to take back any island. We're gonna cost them so many lives that maybe they'll at least give up before they get to Japan. Maybe they'll push us, take a couple of our islands back, and then they'll just leave us alone because it's not worth the cost. And so we'll cover that and we'll be done. Any questions? Okay, so we want to talk about island hopping. Someone's already brought that up. We want to talk about 2 battles, and specifically one named Tarawa, and then the other one we'll talk about is Okinawa, and then we'll talk about the Manhattan Project.
Ooh. You know that they were gonna bomb Tokyo, but then they realized that would make Japan really mad, and they would just keep fighting.
Well, we'll get to it, but we definitely bombed Tokyo. In fact, we killed more people in Tokyo than we killed with the 2 atomic bombs. We dropped napalm on Tokyo and killed over 200,000 Japanese.
Yeah, but we were gonna originally nuclear bomb.
And they chose instead military targets. There weren't huge military bases in Tokyo, so there wasn't a justification for dropping a weapon on that city. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had military facilities, and so that they were kind of more justifiable military targets. But we'll get to that after the first 2. Island hopping. What's island hopping?
I know that one.
No, anybody besides Sam? The key here is that the U.S. is not planning to take every single Japanese island. There's too many of them. The Japanese fight too tenaciously. The idea is they just want to create a chain of bases that will get them to where?
The mainland.
The mainland. They want to get to the mainland of Japan where they can then bomb the mainland and hopefully bomb the mainland and invade it and force Japan to surrender. So it's the idea that I'm not going to take back everything the Japanese have taken. We're just going to take select islands that allow us to hop our way closer to Japan and drop and begin to attack and invade the mainland of Japan. And so that's their general strategy during the Pacific War. Choose selectively key islands and hop our way to the mainland of Japan.
Kind of like Frogger.
Sure, if you like hopping. So two battles within that then are Tarawa and Okinawa. And the reason to mention Tarawa, does anybody know anything about Tarawa? I don't think it was only one little vocab in your readings, but the key things to know about Tarawa is it was small. There's this small little island. It was kind of like, no, who cares? It's just this little island. But what makes any island valuable is they have airfield, which means they can launch the most powerful weapon during the war, which are airplanes. It has airfields, and it has 4,500 defenders on this tiny little island. And the reason that's worth noting is they go in, and it's not in itself a major battle. I mean, we need this island or it's going to change the war, but they go in to take this small little island that has an airfield on it, 4,500 defenders. That's not incredibly lot. The Americans are going to send something like 8,000. But by the end of the battle, only 17 surrender. Only 17 Japanese surrender. Why is that significant?
They pretty much fought until they all died.
Yeah.
They fought until they all died. This is where the U.S., the Battle of Tarawa, is where the U.S. realizes that Japan is going to fight to the last man. A typical military force, if they lose 30, 40% casualties, killed and wounded, that force is considered wiped out. We need to surrender, we need to retreat. The Japanese basically fight to 99% destruction. And that's horrifying. This is where they'd go and they'd try to tend to the Japanese wounded like you typically would, and the Japanese wounded would roll over and they'd have a grenade and they'd try to blow up medics. They would have guys raise the white flag, they'd surrender, and then as soon as they came to take them prisoners, they would start shooting them or again, start suicide grenading themselves. They would let themselves be taken prisoner, get themselves into a big group of Americans, and then blow themselves up. It was just kind of like, it was kind of a warning to the U.S. like, this is going to be different. There's no rules to this warfare. It's going to be nasty. And with any island we choose to take back from the Japanese, we're basically going to have to wipe them all out. They refuse to be taken prisoner. And that is a brutal, brutal thing that people in the history of warfare you hadn't run into very much. So it kind of signaled, it was early on in the island hopping campaign, but it kind of signaled that this was going to get pretty nasty. And then Okinawa is the last major battle of the Pacific. Does anybody remember what happened at Okinawa? There's a video on it.
Isn't there like a bunch of deaths? There was a lot of death there. Like a lot of people died that day.
Well, by then Japan had resorted to an even more horrifying.
Kamikaze, yeah.
Yay.
Kamikaze.
Kamikazes. Divine wind. Okay, kamikaze attacks. This is where Japan knows, again, they're losing the war. They know they can't go on the offense. So their only hope is to kill as many Americans as possible in order to make them say, you know what, it's not worth it. Let them keep Okinawa. Let them keep Tarawa. Let them keep Iwo Jima. Let them keep their mainland, because it's just absolutely brutal. And so this is where they launch over the course of the Battle of Okinawa 1,900 kamikazes. They're not even, it used to be, okay, if my plane was wounded and I didn't know what else to do, I'd fly it into an American ship to try to destroy it. Now that's the whole point. I'm going to arm my plane, and I am a kamikaze pilot. I am trained simply to get up in the air and fly my plane into an American ship. And there's 1,900 of these in this battle alone. And they sink 34 American ships. And that's compared to 18 ships at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. loses 34 ships. They kill almost 5,000 American sailors. It's the largest loss of life in U.S. Navy history for a single battle. It's worse than Pearl Harbor. It is absolutely horrifying because no one's ever seen this tactic used to this degree before, and it's absolutely shocking. And added to that, that's in the sea battle. That's with the Navy. On the actual island of Okinawa, and this you haven't had yet, so I think this is new, but they have this thing, but you've probably heard of it, of a banzai charge. On the actual island, they begin to get so desperate that they have these banzai charges, which are just basically the equivalent for an infantry soldier. They're going to they can't win the battle, they can't hold out, so they're just going to charge and try to overrun the U.S. position and kill as many. They know they're going to lose, but let's see how many we can kill before they kill us. And the most famous instances is 3,000 Japanese soldiers banzai charged the American lines on Okinawa. They had guys they had Japanese soldiers on crutches carrying grenades in their teeth, saying, you know, I'm done, but I'm going to take some Americans with me. It went on for hours, just a suicide charge, and they're just mowing down the Japanese as they charge at them. Their machine guns are overheating. They overrun some of the American lines before they're able to stop them, because the Japanese are willing to just die at any cost. And it's just, again, absolutely horrendous. And the casualties that the American Marines and Army take is really shocking. Added to that is you get this issue of civilian suicides on Okinawa. And you'll see why this plays into the atomic bomb in a second, because Okinawa is actually a Japanese island and it has civilians. And what the Japanese tell these civilians is that the Americans are devils and the Americans are cannibals. And the Americans, if they take this city, the Americans are going to come and they're going to eat your children. They're going to rape your women. They're going to brutalize you. They're monsters. They're demons. And so what the tragic thing is, as the Americans push towards the civilian centers on Okinawa, they begin to see all these civilians lining up on these massive sea cliffs. And all the men, women, and children begin to jump off of the cliffs and commit suicide because they've been basically brainwashed to believe they're better off killing themselves and their families than letting the Americans capture them. And the Americans would sit there and try to warn them over loudspeakers. No, we're here. We're going to help you. We have food. We have medicine. But again, the level of brainwashing was so powerful that several thousand Okinawa civilians commit suicide rather than be taken captive by the Americans. Well, how does that connect to the atomic bomb?
It connects to the atomic bomb because they were like, wow, these Japanese are not going to like give up and they're just going to fight and we're going to lose so many casualties. Let's just end this really quick with an atomic bomb. They'll kill more people, but hey, at least it'll be done really quickly.
Yep. If that happened on tiny little Tarawa and that happened on tiny little Okinawa, can you imagine what would happen if they actually tried to invade the main homeland of Japan? First of all, every Japanese citizen, man, woman, and child fighting to the death. All their entire population willing to kill themselves rather than be taken captive by American troops. The estimates for an invasion, it was called Operation Trumpet and Operation Cornet. They basically said the U.S. is going to have 1 million casualties, that the U.S. is going to lose 1 million men in order to take back. We only lost 400,000 in the entire war, Europe and the Pacific. Just to take the Japanese mainland, they estimated 1 million casualties. And they estimated that about 5 million Japanese would die. That's important. 5 million Japanese would die if we were to invade, and then we would take 1 million casualties. To them, so the stakes of a Japanese invasion, and I think you saw this in one of the videos, was just almost unimaginable. And so that's going to make the atomic bomb all that more. It's kind of horrible to think of it as merciful, but like Sam just said, it's better. Let's end this quickly, and potentially we can save a lot of American lives and a lot of Japanese lives as well. The Manhattan Project. Anybody know who was first to start trying to build an atomic bomb?
Germany.
Germany, very good. They were racing Germany. It was actually a good old Albert Einstein, among others, who sent a note to FDR, the American president, saying, I think you should be aware of what the German scientists are working on over here. And this was in the late 30s. And so FDR said, you know what, we better start racing them, because as we find out, Germany was only a few months from having their own atomic bomb. And so it actually started out of fear of what would happen in Europe, even though it actually ends up being used in the war in the Pacific. Where were the Manhattan Project? That was its code name. So that's where we get Manhattan. It was not in Manhattan. Where did they actually work on this thing?
They started working on this in like Arizona.
Close, New Mexico, Los Alamos Labs in New Mexico.
Yeah, because I remember my dad went there.
Okay. And so it's super top secret project. The leader was a guy named Oppenheimer. And it was just a few in 1945. It was just in June that they were able to set off a test bomb in in New Mexico. And as soon as they heard that was available, they said, you know what, we're going to use this to end the war in the Pacific. They warned the Japanese ahead of time. They said, hey, we have a terrible new weapon. It's going to destroy an entire city. Will you surrender? Hirohito and Tojo said, no, we're not going to surrender. So they bomb Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. They bomb Hiroshima and they say, now do you surrender? And Japan goes, no, you don't have another one of those. And so then they go ahead and bomb Nagasaki. Total, it estimates both from the initial explosions and the later radiation, about 150,000 Japanese are killed with just those 2 bombs.
And that's why you don't try America.
Which is absolutely horrendous. But again, compare that to the estimate of 4 to 5 million Japanese killed if they had actually invaded. So as horrible as what those bombs did, you have to put it in context of things like Tarawa and Okinawa and what had been happening on these small, tiny islands already. And so the war ends in September 1945. Japan finally, after the second bomb, Japan surrenders.
I just want to get myself some of that power armor.
Okay. Any questions?
So, were we really a part of the World War, or were we just fighting Japan?
Oh no,
So
we were
no, and that's I've split it up into 2 weeks. No, the U.S. is fighting on both fronts. We fought in the Pacific first, but basically the day after we declare war on Japan, Germany declares war on us. And so we begin. But what reason I start this way is the U.S.'s strategy in this was saying we need to defeat Germany first and then Japan. They were more worried about Germany because of the atomic bomb and because of Germany's resources than Japan. We knew Japan didn't have the, again, think about the oil embargo. Japan did not have the same level of resources as Germany did. So we'll be talking about the war in Europe next week.
Oh, then.
This is only half the story. And that's one of the amazing things. All this is going on in basically America's right hand, and everything else is going on. They're fighting another war over with their left hand in Europe.
What are you doing? It better work.
I am.
Okay, so three so whats. I want you to. You got something, Sam?
After this, America will be getting into a very cold war against Russia because of the nuclear bomb.
Okay, so yes, one of them is the nuclear age. That you want the idea that if you have the fighting in the Pacific is absolutely terrified. Guys fighting Germany and Europe, when they found out they could get transferred to the Pacific, they were terrified. When you enlisted or you were drafted, you would basically be taken to a boot camp and you'd be put on a train, and the soldiers would basically pay attention. If that train headed east, it meant they were going to take you to fight in Europe. If the train headed west, it meant they were going to take you to fight in the Pacific. And guys were pretty terrified of going to the Pacific because they knew the horrors of what was being, of how the Japanese were fighting. The Germans would surrender. The Germans wouldn't fight till they only had 7 guys left, but the Japanese wouldn't. And so you want to talk about the brutal, fanatical fighting that took place in the Pacific that made the nuclear bomb necessary. The atomic bomb saved lives. But as Sam said, the trade-off of that is that we now enter the nuclear age, and we'll enter something called the Cold War, where now all of a sudden warfare's just leveled up, where holy cow, we've got these weapons that could really change everything. So that's one big thing. What did I say surprised the Japanese after Pearl Harbor?
That we cracked their code and that we were able to get up so fast.
Okay, both of those things. So the importance of code breaking is kind of a key thing, and also U.S. resolve and recovery, industrial might. Again, the Japanese had kind of hoped we'd back down once we took that terrible blow, but instead it only made the U.S. more resolved to finish the fight. And the fact that we were able to fix our ships and make so many ships, make so many new ships. Next week, we're going to see how many days it took us to build a ship by the end of the war. And it was pretty amazing. And so those two things, again, the bravery of the soldiers is key, but the fact that we were able to stick with the fighting, we didn't give up. When we heard about all the tens of thousands of American casualties on these islands, we didn't say, well, that's not worth the cost. No, there was an incredible American resolve, and then a great industrial might to get them the ships and the equipment and the aircraft that they needed. The U.S. really, in a way, wins because of our economic power. And the last thing I would just say is that the importance of warfare shifting. Let me spell it right. Warfare shifting to carriers and aircraft. That was a key aspect of the war in the Pacific, is the importance of airplanes, and because of all the distances involved from island to island, and that you could have all the battleships and destroyers and even submarines you wanted, but whoever controlled the air was going to be able to dominate. And that's again why Midway was such a pivotal battle. And why, as bad as Pearl Harbor was, it wasn't the end for the U.S. because they didn't get our carriers.
I guess that's a good thing.
For us.
Can you see me? I'm just wondering. My computer's been acting weird.
No, I can see you.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
can see you.
I know it's been a little while, so I don't want to keep you any longer. Any questions? Everybody doing okay? Did that work for everybody? Some of you start to write it already? Get it done?
I have a question.
Just make sure, again, when in your summaries, obviously make sure the formatting's good, and make sure that what you write shows understanding. I purposely kept my notes really basic here because I don't want you just to take these notes and put capitals and periods on them. Make sure it shows that you understand what you're talking about.
I have a question.
Sam, question.
Why, if the Japanese saw that their defeat was imminent, then why would they keep fighting? Why didn't they just surrender?
Well, because what were they were trying to keep something.
Honor?
Well, I think honor, but they were trying to keep their islands. they had expanded into Indonesia. They had territory in China. They had territory in Korea. They had territory in what is now Vietnam. And so they had all this territory, and they thought if we can at least make the U.S. not want to keep advancing on us, even though we're not going to expand anymore, at least we'll get to keep what we have. And so they didn't want to surrender that stuff. So they were basically, let's make it so costly for the Americans to take back what we've taken that they'll at least let us keep some of it.
Good point.
And I think kudos to our president and again the American resolve that they endured absolutely horrendous battles at places like Okinawa and Iwo Jima in order to say no, we're going to have total surrender by Japan.
Well, thank you for that information.
Sure. Everybody else good?
I have a question.
Sure.
What are we doing for Weebly? Like, are we still just copying, pasting, or?
Yeah, so if you didn't hit
Summaries?
that, your website's going to continue exactly as before. So you need to write this summary. I've already created the assignment to turn it in on by Wednesday. And then you need to, copy and paste that into your website, create a page for Pearl Harbor. And then it should a pull-out quote. You need at least one picture. And then the link at the bottom should take me to your completed slide deck.
Okay.
Link at the bottom should take me to the completed slide deck.
Okay, that makes sense.
So keep working on that. We'll have a checkup coming up here in April.
Okay.
All right.
I am wearing a hat and a beanie. I call it the beanie hat.
What's your cat's name, Sam?
A cat? Oh, that would be Squirm.
Squirm, that's amazing.
Because he doesn't
Cat
have
is
squirms
cool.
around when he's picked up. His real name's because he's named after the gun we were originally going to put him down with, but we just